This video is an introduction to emergency services, critical infrastructure, and cybersecurity. This video is brought to you by the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College. NCyTE Center in this material is based upon work supported by the National Science Foundation. My name is Philip Kreger. I am a professor of cybersecurity at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach, Florida. So in this video, we'll cover the definition of emergency services, what comprises emergency services, interdependencies with other critical infrastructure, trends and emerging issues, the cyber component of emergency services, a couple of recent attacks on emergency services, and finally a wrap-up. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, has identified 16 critical infrastructures. One of these is the emergency services sector. The emergency services sector is a community of millions of highly skilled, trained personnel along with physical and cyber resources that provide a wide range of prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery services during both day-to-day operations and incident response. This includes geographically distributed facilities and equipment in both paid and volunteer capacities organized primarily at the federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial levels of government, such as city police departments, fire stations, county sheriff's offices, Department of Defense police and fire departments, and town public works departments. And there are really three primary components of the emergency services sector. What are those? The first is the physical component. The physical component includes the operations and storage facilities, specialized equipment, and vehicle fleets that enable personnel in each discipline to perform critical services during steady state and crisis operations. The second component is the human component. The sector's most important component are their human assets, more than 2.5 million career and volunteer practitioners who serve in every community in the United States. And finally, most relevant to this video is the cyber component. ESS operations are increasingly dependent on complex information technology and cyber systems, particularly as security technologies advance. Emergency operations communications, database management, biometric activities, telecommunications, and electronic security systems are conducted virtually and all are vulnerable to cyber disruptions. The sector widely uses the internet to provide information alerts, warnings, and threats to ESS and other critical infrastructure partners. The degradation of the systems that support these activities would significantly raise the overall risk to a facility and individual emergency responders and could impede effective operations. So we saw that there are three primary components, but what specifically comprises what we call emergency services? Well, there's really 5 emergency services. We have emergency management, law enforcement, public works, fire and rescue services, and emergency medical services. But it's much more complicated than that when we drill down. For example, additional services include things like tactical teams, special weapons and tactics, hazardous devices team, public safety bomb disposal, public safety dive teams and maritime units, canine units, aviation units, hazardous materials, or what we call hazmat, search and rescue teams, public safety answering points, what we call 911 in call centers in the United States, private security guard forces, and finally, National Guard civil support. Emergency services is a complex system of interconnected systems at the local, state, and federal levels, including tribal and territorial levels. The ESS is the most geographically distributed sector with more than 2.5 million personnel serving every location in all 50 states, 5 territories, and the District of Columbia. Security and resilience planning and decisions take place primarily at the regional and local level. Complex systems and dispersed assets make it difficult to disable the entire system, but also pose challenges to coordination across disciplines, regions, and levels of government. Now, why do I have complex systems in bold? And the reason is that while that may be true that directly attacking a particular emergency service in a particular location may not disable the entire system, the whole idea behind critical infrastructure is that there are a lot of interdependencies between a lot of the critical infrastructures, meaning that They are highly interdependent, and if one has an issue, it's likely to have an effect on other interdependent infrastructures. So what am I talking about? So let's look at some of the interdependencies. The first is energy, and we've already discussed this in 2 of the energy videos that I created a few months ago. Fuel and electric power are essential for ESS operations and the ability of critical infrastructure to respond to emergencies. Another thing we've already talked about is communications. Communications and energy are a backbone of almost all of the critical infrastructures. With communications, radio spectrum networks and infrastructure enable ESS to carry out its mission, allowing the communications between federal, state, and local regions. Another thing we've talked about are transportation systems. We have videos on the national airspace and aviation. We have videos on the maritime system as well as unmanned aerial systems. So with regard to the transportation systems, secure and effective movement of goods and personnel over multiple modes is required for emergency response and recovery. There's also water. Water is critical for sustaining communities and infrastructure before, during, and after emergencies. Healthcare and public health. First responders and EMS coordinate with the healthcare sector to respond to emergencies. And finally, information technology. A variety of cyber-related assets, systems, and disciplines are increasingly essential to help ESS carry out its missions. So if a malicious actor wanted to have an effect upon the emergency services sector, the malicious actor wouldn't necessarily have to directly affect the ESS. They could affect one of its interdependent components, such as energy, communications, or the transportation system, or information technology. What are some trends and emerging issues when it comes to the security of the emergency services sector? The public has increasing expectations for ESS personnel to respond with expertise to incidents of all kinds and provide constant real-time information sharing. Reductions in grant funding to state and local departments and diminished budgets may affect the capacity of the ESS to adequately address and anticipate or prepare for changes to its threat profile. Frequent and extreme weather events will increase the response demands, which may drain sector personnel, assets, and capabilities. Natural disasters also threaten key services that enable ESS response. Increased population density in urban and suburban areas and specific population characteristics, for example, increasingly mobile and interconnected, new access and functional needs, language barriers, and so on, may exacerbate existing risks. Aging infrastructure throughout the United States, including electrical grids, water, wastewater systems, and roads and bridges, increases the risk of failure, which creates incidents that require ESS response while also impeding services critical to ESS functions. As the average age of personnel across the sector increases, the ESS is at risk for losing key experience and expertise in its workforce due to retirement. The ESS has become increasingly dependent on cyber assets, systems, and disciplines to carry out its primary mission to protect and respond to emergency situations. Cyber technology advancements such as the development of next-generation 911, the transition towards cloud-based information systems, and the usage of geospatial tools have enabled the ESS to expand and improve its operations. However, new risks associated with such advancements, including data encryption limitations, location accuracy gaps, GPS disruptions, driver distractions, and user information privacy issues challenge the sector's capability to quickly and safely respond to emergencies. So what are some potential threats to emergency services? Well, recall that we discussed that emergency services really has 3 primary components: physical, cyber, and human, but let's just focus upon the cyber for right now. Hardware and software components that are critical to supporting the ESS mission, including computers, servers, databases, and other IT systems and assets, are used in activities and typically fulfill one of 4 roles. These include access controls, which limits physical access to defined areas of a facility to authorized personnel and visitors only. Control systems monitor and control sensitive processes and physical functions. Warning and alert sends alerts and notifications with critical information that triggers protection and response actions. And finally, data collection systems, which collect data for record retention and information sharing. Now, with regard to warning and alerts, I'm sure you've all been driving along the road, and pretty much anywhere I've seen in the United States, there are signs, electronic signs on the road that have amber alerts and silver alerts. And so we're all used to seeing these types of alerts that are sent out by the emergency services sector. And a few years ago, there was an interesting incident that occurred in Hawaii with respect to an alert that was sent out by the emergency services sectors. And it went out over various modalities, this warning message, including text, on TVs, over the radio, and on electronic billboards in Hawaii. And essentially it said this: emergency alert, ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. This was not a real attack. This was supposed to be a practice session that was set up by the emergency services somewhere in Hawaii, that just in case there was some sort of civil event like this, that they could test to see whether their emergency alert system was working. This was not supposed to go out to the general public. This was only supposed to be an internal test. The issue was that the human-computer interface that was being used for the emergency alert system had several virtual buttons on the screen. And I can't remember exactly what it looked out, but I'll tell you that it had two important buttons. One of which was to send out an actual alert such as this over to all public modalities. So the second button was supposed to be a test button. And the test button was just supposed to be for internal use only. It wasn't supposed to go out to the public. But because these two buttons were right next to each other with no distinguishing features other than the word test on one of them, is that someone accidentally selected the wrong button, and this is what occurred. So I know I haven't discussed this before, but human-computer interaction and graphical user interface design should be considered a key component to any cybersecurity system. So let's look at some of the mitigating disruptions from the loss of lifeline functions and describe that. So all critical infrastructure sectors rely on the security and availability of certain lifeline functions that are essential to sector operations, and we've kind of already discussed these. These lifeline functions include the aspects of communications, energy, transportation, and water. For mitigating disruptions, maintaining redundant communication systems and equipment for the continuous flow of emergency information. In fact, that's why the Internet was set up in the first place in 1970, in that era, so that in case there was a major war or a nuclear attack, if the communications between distinct populations in the United States wouldn't be stopped just because one system was taken down in a particular area. Coordinating fuel and power availability with energy sector partners for emergency services. Leveraging ESS assessment tools to identify available resources and potential lifeline function points of failure. Developing and implementing mutual aid mechanisms between disciplines and sectors that provide lifeline functions so that disruptions can be more readily absorbed and addressed. And finally, engaging in robust training and exercises to expand the understanding of lifeline function disruption consequences and establish effective mitigation practices. So let's look at some examples of recent cyber attacks throughout the world. We'll talk about two. The first occurred in Wales, and it was an attack upon the National Health System emergency services in that area. And this website went on to say, and by the way, this only occurred like 2 weeks ago from when I'm making this video. The website says the UK National Health Services emergency services are being affected by a substantial and ongoing interruption of services triggered by a cyber attack, impairing the systems of their managed service provider. The attack is disrupting all NHS 111 services across the UK. By the way, 111 in the UK is the same as 911 in the United States. The Welsh ambulance services were the first to make a statement. There is a major outage of a computer system that is used to refer patients from NHS Wales to out-of-hours GPS providers. A business continuity incident has been declared, and partners across Wales have developed and deployed plans so that services can continue to operate. Another website discussing this incident said that the attack on Adastra's client patient management solutions, which is used by 81% of NHS 111 services, is yet another example of the unprecedented increase in cyber attacks targeting the IT systems of healthcare organizations. Adastra, who suffered a loss of service, has taken the responsible precautionary measure of isolating all of its health and care environments containing the attack, and segmenting critical services and data should be a top priority in the event of a cyber attack. Sadly, cyber attacks like this one that threaten the delivery of critical services will be an ordeal we continue to read about. In another area, this month, there was a cyber attack that shut down the Fremont County offices that were disrupting government services, with the Fremont County office being in Colorado. The story goes that the Fremont County in Southern California was dealing with the fallout of a cyber attack. County services were limited to as officials tried to assess the full impact of the cyber attack. The cyber attack was discovered, but county officials didn't announce it until 2 days later. I'm not sure if that was a good idea. It's not clear whether the breach was part of a ransomware attack or if hackers targeted a specific service. So at that point in time, they had not completed their incident response and weren't sure of the genesis of the type of attack. But I'm sure by now they should, although I haven't read any updates on this. The county believes the attack is contained to their servers and is not spread to other local or state systems. I'll get back to that in a second. Office computer systems have been affected and county employees are unable to access their business emails due to the attack. So if that was the only repercussion of the attack, being able to access their business emails, hopefully there are backups and they have a backup plan so they can reconstitute those emails and continue their business. That's something that we've discussed before is necessary for redundant systems and also for backup. It was suspected that that might be ransomware. So what is ransomware? Well, we've talked about it a little bit, so let me go through this very quickly just in case you haven't had the chance to look at the other videos where I discuss ransomware, which according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation is one of the #1 threats in the United States right now. So ransomware is really a form of malware that is malicious software. And it's malware that employs encryption to hold a victim's information at ransom. Implanted malware encrypts a user's or organization's data so that they cannot access files, databases, or applications. A ransom is then demanded by the malign actors to provide access to the company's or the user's data. Ransomware is often designed to spread across a network and target database and file servers and can thus quickly paralyze an entire organization. So essentially, if you can affect one computer with ransomware on a network due to a vulnerability in that system, if all of the computers on that network had the same vulnerability, then that would allow that ransomware to jump from computer to computer to computer, and not just in the same office, but any computers on the same network at different locations. So I used the word encryption in a previous slide, and encryption is just really a process that scrambles data so that it can only be read by someone who has a secret key or keys to unscramble it. And here's just a real quick example. It's something that I typed up on my MacBook Pro, and this is called plain text. So this is readable text. And when we pull up a file on our computer, we expect to be able to read it. However, if a file or even a hard drive is encrypted with a key and we don't have access to the key, then it looks like that, which means it is unusable. Files are unusable, applications are unusable, maybe even the operating system is unusable. And so that's what was suspected of happening at the Fremont County offices that we just discussed. I already have an entire video on ransomware, and so I will include that link in the description of this video, and I also have one on encryption, so it's nice to have an understanding of both of those. Now in 2015, the Department of Homeland Security put out an emergency services sector-specific plan. So what is this? Each critical infrastructure has a sector-specific plan that talks about threats and attacks and resilience. That is, how to make the sector more resilient from cyber attacks or various other types of attack. And this one was created originally in I think 2007, but it's been updated several times. And this is the 2015 edition, which I just downloaded from CISA's site. And this was supposed to be a 4-year plan. Well, a 4-year plan would run this to 2019. It is now 2022. So they have not, as far as I can find, updated this plan anytime since 2015. So obviously things are going to be changing. This is such a hard problem because there's so many sectors and technologies changing so quickly. It's not really easy to come up with a new sector specific plan with changes occurring so quickly and broadly. So to wrap up, we defined emergency services. We talked about what comprises emergency services. We talked about the interdependencies with other critical infrastructure, which deals with a lot of the other videos we've just discussed and posted on NCyTE's YouTube site. We talked about trends and emerging issues. We talked about the cyber component of emergency services. We looked at a couple of attacks on emergency services, and we had this wrap up. This video was brought to you by the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College.